Welcome to my channel. Let's dive into a new story and find out what came after love.
They say betrayal doesn't start with a kiss or a hidden message. It starts with a silent, sickening shiver in the marrow of your bones that tells you the world you've built is made of glass and someone is holding a hammer. I spent 9 months decorating a nursery. I spent 9 months talking to a belly, whispering promises of protection to a child I thought carried my blood. I was the perfect husband. I was the provider, the protector, the fool. But as I stand here today, staring at a DNA report that feels heavier than a lead weight, I realize I wasn't a father. I was a puppet in a 9-month play, and my wife, Sarah, was the director. Let's go back to the beginning. We had been married for just a few months when Sarah said she needed one last wild weekend before we really settled down to start a family. She called it her late Bachelorette Trip since our wedding had been so rushed and formal. She and her 3 best friends, women I'd known for years, decided on a 5-day getaway to Cabo. I didn't hesitate. I trusted her completely. I remember driving her to the airport, kissing her forehead, and telling her to have the time of her life. She looked me in the eyes and told me she'd miss me every second. While she was gone, there was total radio silence. She blamed it on bad reception and a desire to truly disconnect from the world. When she returned, she was different. She was frantic, overly affectionate, almost desperate to be close to me the second she stepped through the door. 2 weeks later, she came out of the bathroom holding a plastic stick with 2 pink lines. I fell to my knees and cried. I thought it was a miracle. I didn't see the way her hands shook. I didn't notice that she couldn't look me in the eye when I talked about the timing. The pregnancy was a long, slow withdrawal. I became the man I thought I should be. I worked double shifts to build a savings account. I rubbed her feet every night. I assembled the crib with my own hands, but every time I touched her stomach, I felt a wall. Not a physical one, but a wall of secrets so thick it was suffocating. She started talking in her sleep, murmuring names I didn't recognize. When I'd ask her about it, she'd laugh it off as pregnancy brain. Then there were the photos. One night she left her old phone unlocked on the nightstand. I wasn't looking for lies, I was looking for a photo of us to frame. I scrolled back to that Cabo trip. There were dozens of photos I hadn't seen. They weren't just at the pool. In one blurry shot from a dark club, I saw her. She wasn't with her friends. She was leaning into a man, a stranger with his hand firmly on the small of her back. My heart skipped a beat, but I shoved the doubt down. I chose to be blind. The day our son Leo was born should have been the greatest day of my life. But when the nurse handed him to me, the room went silent in my head. I am fair-skinned with blue eyes. Sarah is blonde. This baby had deep olive skin and curls of jet black hair. I looked at Sarah, and for a split second I saw pure, unadulterated terror in her eyes. She quickly masked it with a tired smile and claimed he looked just like her distant grandfather from the Mediterranean side of the family. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her to keep my soul intact. But as the weeks passed, the excuses crumbled. My friends stopped making eye contact. My mother whispered behind closed doors. Every time I looked at Leo, I didn't see a son. I saw a question mark. The doubt became a physical pain in my chest, a parasite eating me from the inside out. So I did the one thing I promised I'd never do. I bought a private kit. I waited until Sarah was in the shower, swiped the swab inside the baby's cheek, and mailed it off in secret. I lived in a state of suspended animation for days, hovering between hope and total destruction. And now here I am. The envelope is open. The words probability of paternity, 0%, are screaming at me from the page. The boy I've been feeding, the boy I've been singing to, the boy I've been calling my son for the last 2 months is the living proof of a stranger's night with my wife. I hear the garage door opening. I hear her footsteps in the hallway, humming a light tune, carrying bags of groceries like we are a normal, happy family. She doesn't know that the play is over. She doesn't know that the lights have come up and I can finally see the stage. My hands are shaking, not with sadness anymore, but with a cold, sharpening rage. The woman I loved is a stranger, and the life I thought I had was a lie sold to me by the person I trusted most in this world. How does a person look their spouse in the face after this? How do you look at a child who is innocent but represents the ultimate betrayal? I have the papers in my hand, I have the truth, and as the door handle turns, I realize that the man who drove her to the airport all those months ago is dead. I am someone else now, and she is about to find out exactly what happens when the puppet finally cuts his own strings. The door clicked shut behind her, and the sound of grocery bags hitting the kitchen counter echoed through the house. She called out my name in that light, airy voice that used to be my favorite sound in the world. To anyone else, she sounded like a loving wife coming home to her family. To me, she sounded like a siren leading a ship toward the rocks. I didn't answer. I sat there in the dim light of the living room, the DNA results resting on my lap like a ticking bomb. When she walked into the room, she saw me. She started to say something about the traffic, but the words died in her throat when she saw the look on my face. Her eyes dropped to the paper. In an instant, the color drained from her skin, leaving her looking like a ghost. For a long minute, neither of us spoke. The silence was so heavy I could hear the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. each second marking the death of our marriage. "Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling, "what is that?" "You know exactly what this is, Sarah," I said. My voice was eerily calm, the kind of calm that comes when you've already felt the worst pain imaginable and there's nothing left to fear. I did the math, I did the test, and now I'm looking at the zeros. 0% chance, Sarah, not a fluke, not a mistake, 0. She tried to move toward me, her hands reaching out as if she could pull the lie back over my eyes. "Mark, honey, listen to me. Tests can be wrong. They swap samples at those labs all the time. We can do another one, a professional one at the hospital." "Stop," I barked, and the sharpness of my voice made her flinch. "Stop lying. It's over. I saw the photos from Cabo. I saw the man at the club. I saw the way you looked at Leo the day he was born. You didn't look at him with a mother's joy. You looked at him like he was a smoking gun. You've had 9 months to tell me the truth. You let me paint that room. You let me pick his name. You let me cry when I heard his heartbeat." She collapsed onto the ottoman across from me, her face buried in her hands. The sobbing started then, deep guttural sounds that would have broken my heart an hour ago. Now they just felt like static. She began to confess, the words spilling out in a frantic, disjointed mess. She told me about that night in Cabo. She told me how she had too much to drink, how her friends encouraged her to just live a little, and how she met a man whose name she barely even remembered. She thought it was a one-time mistake that would stay buried in the sand of a Mexican beach. When she found out she was pregnant, she panicked. She convinced herself that the dates lined up just enough to pass the child off as mine. "I did it for us," she wailed, looking up at me with tear-streaked cheeks. "I didn't want to lose you, Mark. I love you more than anything, and I knew if I told you, you'd leave. I thought if I was the perfect mother, if I was the best wife, it wouldn't matter whose blood he had. I wanted him to be yours. In my heart, he is yours." The audacity of those words sent a jolt of lightning through my veins. "In your heart, you stole my life, Sarah. You turned my home into a crime scene. You made me love a child that isn't mine just so you wouldn't have to face the consequences of your own choices. That's not love, that's a hostage situation." I stood up, the paper fluttering to the floor. I couldn't be in the same room with her anymore. Every memory of the last year felt tainted, like a beautiful painting that had been sprayed with acid. I walked past her toward the stairs, but she grabbed my arm, her grip desperate and claw-like. "Where are you going? Mark, please, we can talk about this. Think about Leo. He needs a father. He loves you. You're the only dad he knows. You can't just turn your back on an innocent baby." I looked down at her hand on my arm, then into her eyes. The manipulation was still there, even now. She was using the child as a shield, trying to guilt me into staying in a house built on a foundation of rot. "Leo is innocent," I said quietly, "but he is not mine. And every time I look at him, I will see your betrayal and that stranger's face. I won't be a ghost in my own home, Sarah. I'm leaving. My lawyer will be calling you in the morning." I shook her off and went to the bedroom. I grabbed a suitcase and started throwing clothes into it. It didn't matter what, I just needed to go. As I was packing, I heard the baby start to cry over the monitor. It was the same cry I had jumped out of bed to soothe 100 times before. Usually my instinct was to run to him, to bounce him in my arms until he fell back asleep. But this time I froze. My feet felt like they were made of lead. The crying continued, growing louder, more urgent. Sarah didn't go to him. She was still downstairs, sobbing on the floor. I stood there, caught between the man I used to be and the man I was becoming. I realized then that the tragedy wasn't just my marriage ending. It was that the love I felt for that little boy was being suffocated by the reality of his existence. I walked out of the bedroom, suitcase in hand, and headed for the front door. Sarah was standing in the hallway now, her hair disheveled, looking like a hollow shell of the woman I married. "If you walk out that door," she whispered, her voice cold now, "I'll tell everyone you abandoned us. I'll tell the world you're a coward who couldn't handle being a father. I'll make sure you're the villain in this story." I paused with my hand on the doorknob. I turned back and looked at her one last time. "Go ahead, Sarah, tell them whatever you want, but I have the DNA results, I have the photos, and I have the truth. And unlike you, I don't have to live a lie every single day for the rest of my life." I stepped out into the night air. It was cold, sharp, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could actually breathe. I got into my car and drove away, not knowing where I was going, but knowing I could never go back. The first few days in the hotel were a blur of fluorescent lights and cheap coffee. I spent most of my time staring at the ceiling, waiting for the crushing weight in my chest to ease, but it only grew. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart skipped a beat. It was Sarah. Dozens of texts, hundreds of missed calls. They transitioned from begging and apologies to vitriol and threats, then back to photos of the baby in his swing, captioned with, "He misses his daddy." It was psychological warfare, and she knew exactly where I was vulnerable. By the fourth day, I realized I couldn't just hide. I needed to protect myself. I met with a lawyer, a sharp woman named Elena who had seen 1,000 versions of my story. She looked at the DNA results and the photos from Cabo. Her expression didn't change, but her voice was cold and professional. She told me that in the eyes of the law, because I was married to Sarah when the child was born, I was the legal father. I was on the birth certificate. If I didn't act quickly and aggressively to disestablish paternity, I would be paying for Sarah's vacation mistake for the next 18 years. She's already started the narrative, Mark, Elena said, turning her laptop screen toward me. Sarah had posted a long, tearful status on Facebook. She didn't mention the DNA test. She spoke about postpartum struggles and how her husband had snapped and walked out on his family in the middle of the night. The comments were a bloodbath. Our mutual friends, people I had known for a decade, were calling me a monster. My own mother had left me a voicemail, crying, asking how I could leave a helpless infant. Sarah wasn't just hiding the truth, she was weaponizing the world against me. I decided then that I wouldn't go down quietly. I didn't post on social media. I didn't argue in the comments. Instead, I sent a simple, private message to her 3 best friends who had gone to Cabo with her. I attached the DNA results and the photo of the man from the club. I wrote one sentence: I know which one of you helped her hide this, and when this goes to court, I will make sure the truth about that trip is public record. The silence from their end was deafening, but within an hour the loyal sisterhood began to crack. One of them, a girl named Chloe who always had a guilty conscience, called me. She was shaking, crying over the phone. She admitted that Sarah had met a guy at a beach bar, a tourist from Spain. It wasn't a mistake from being too drunk. It was a 3-day affair while I was at home fixing the leak in our roof. They had all promised to take the secret to their grave. She told us you'd never know, Mark, Chloe sobbed. She said you were too stable, too trusting to ever question her. We didn't think there would be a baby. Equipped with this confirmation, I returned to our house to gather the rest of my things while Sarah was out at her mother. The silence of the nursery was deafening. I looked at the midnight blue walls I had painted. I looked at the handmade crib. I felt a surge of grief so intense I had to lean against the wall to breathe. I still loved that little boy, and that was the cruelest part of Sarah's lie. She had given me a heart and then ripped it out. As I was packing my final box, the front door opened. It wasn't Sarah. It was her mother, Joyce. She walked into the nursery and looked at me with a mix of pity and disdain. You're really doing this, Mark. You're going to let a piece of paper destroy a family. Look at that boy and tell me he isn't yours in every way that matters. He's not mine in the only way that would have made this lie forgivable, Joyce, I snapped. She didn't just have an affair. She tried to force me to live a life that wasn't mine. She looked me in the eye every morning for a year and saw a bank account and a babysitter, not a husband. He needs a father, Joyce shouted. Then call Spain, I replied, grabbing my suitcase, because I'm done being the backup plan. As I walked out to my car, I saw Sarah pulling into the driveway. She didn't look like the glowing woman from the airport anymore. She looked desperate. She hopped out of the car, blocking my path, holding Leo in her arms. It was a calculated move. She thought if I saw him, if I heard him coo, I would break. Mark, please, she whispered, her eyes red. Just hold him once. Just once, and tell me you can walk away. I looked at the baby. He reached out a tiny hand, grasping at the air, innocent and unaware that he was the center of a hurricane. My heart broke into a million pieces for him. But then I looked at Sarah, and I saw the calculation in her eyes. She wasn't holding him for his sake. She was using him as a prop. I'm not walking away from a son, Sarah, I said, my voice as hard as stone. I'm walking away from a stranger's child and a wife who never existed. You didn't just break our marriage. You ruined his life before it even started. That's something you'll have to live with, not me. I got into the car and drove. I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I knew the road ahead would be filled with lawyers, courtrooms, and the painful process of erasing a year of my life. But as the house disappeared from view, I realized that the perfect husband was gone. I was a man who had lost everything, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't living a lie. The battle for my name and my future was just beginning, and I was going to make sure that by the time I was done, everyone knew exactly what happened on that Bachelorette trip. The legal battle began like a slow-motion car crash. My lawyer, Elena, moved with surgical precision, filing a petition to disestablish paternity and a suit for divorce on the grounds of fraud. Sarah's initial response was to double down on the victim narrative. She hired a high-priced attorney who specialized in family preservation, and suddenly I was being hit with claims of emotional abuse and abandonment. They tried to argue that my demand for a DNA test was a sign of a controlling and unstable psyche. But the cracks in her circle of friends were widening. Chloe, the one who had confessed over the phone, couldn't handle the pressure. When she was served with a subpoena for a deposition, she realized that lying under oath for Sarah meant risking her own reputation and career. She turned over a group chat from the Cabo trip, a digital trail of everything that had happened. I remember sitting in Alina's office when she pulled up the transcripts. It was worse than I imagined. There were photos of the man from Spain, jokes about what happens in Cabo stays in Cabo, and most hauntingly, a message from Sarah sent 2 weeks after she got back. I think I'm pregnant. Mark is so happy, he'll never suspect a thing. I just have to play the part. Seeing those words in black and white was the final kill shot for any lingering feelings I had. She hadn't just made a mistake. She had planned the deception with the cold efficiency of a corporate merger. The day of the first court hearing was a grey, rainy Tuesday. I stood in the hallway of the courthouse, adjusting my tie, feeling like I was preparing for an execution. Sarah arrived with her mother and the baby. She tried to catch my eye, her expression rehearsed, sad, longing, the wronged wife waiting for her husband to come to his senses. I looked straight past her, focusing on the oak doors of the courtroom. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Sarah's lawyer started with a theatrical opening, talking about the sanctity of the bond between a father and son, and how a biological technicality shouldn't outweigh months of bonding. He called it paternal estoppel, arguing that because I had held myself out as the father, I was now legally bound to that role regardless of the DNA. Then it was Alina's turn. She didn't use flowery language. Oena per oreste o per ocerala veri carela derate idero carazeri naste cyrilliclet 456L. She played an audio clip of Sarah's own confession from the night I confronted her, the part where she admitted she knew the dates didn't line up but did it for us. Then came the group chat transcripts. The judge, a stern man with 30 years on the bench, leaned forward as he read Sarah's messages. The courtroom went silent. You could hear the rain tapping against the high windows. Sarah started to sob, but it wasn't the soft, sympathetic sobbing from before. It was the sound of someone realizing the walls were closing in. "Mrs. Reid," the judge said, his voice echoing in the chamber, "the court is less interested in your emotional state and more interested in the fact that you knowingly and willfully entered a fraudulent paternity claim on a legal birth certificate. That is not a mistake. That is a crime against this man's life and autonomy." He ruled in my favor on the spot regarding the paternity. My name was to be struck from the birth certificate. The legal obligation to provide support was severed, but the victory felt hollow. As the judge spoke, I looked over at the diaper bag Sarah had placed on the floor next to her. It had a little plush bear hanging from the zipper, the one I had bought during our 3rd month of pregnancy. When we walked out of that courtroom, the media-style frenzy Sarah had tried to build on social media had already begun to flip. The truth was leaking out. The friends who had called me a monster were suddenly deleting their comments or sending me "I'm so sorry, I didn't know" messages. I ignored them all. Sarah caught up to me at the elevators. She was alone this time. Her mother had taken the baby to the car. She looked older, the stress finally stripping away the mask of the perfect wife. "Are you happy now?" she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You got what you wanted, you're free. You have no son, no wife, no family. You're just a man in a suit with a piece of paper. Was it worth it?" I looked at her, and for the first time I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel the need to shout or defend myself. I just felt an immense, overwhelming pity for the person she had chosen to become. "I didn't lose a son, Sarah," I said quietly, "because I never had one, and I didn't lose a wife because the woman I thought I married never existed. I'm not the one who's going to have to explain to that boy one day why his father is a ghost and why his mother built his life on a lie. That's your burden. I'm just taking my name back." The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside and watched as they slid shut, cutting off the sight of her standing there in the hallway, finally forced to face the silence of her own making. I walked out of the courthouse and into the rain, not knowing what the next chapter of my life looked like, but knowing that for the first time in a year, I was walking on solid ground. 6 months had passed since the courthouse doors closed behind me. I had moved to a new city, taken a job that kept my mind busy, and slowly started the grueling process of reclaiming my identity. My lawyer had finalized the fraudulent inducement suit, and the settlement was enough to ensure I'd never have to think about the money I spent on that nursery or the medical bills again. But peace isn't something you buy, it's something you survive. I was sitting in a small cafe, enjoying the anonymity of a Tuesday afternoon, when a large, unmarked envelope arrived at my new address. It had been forwarded through Alina's office. Inside was a single photograph and a handwritten letter. The photo was of Leo. He was nearly a year old now. He was sitting in a patch of sunlight, wearing a tiny denim jacket I remembered buying in a moment of excitement months before he was born. He looked happy, but more than that, he looked exactly like the man in the Cabo photos. There was no longer any room for Mediterranean grandfathers or genetic flukes. The truth was written in every feature of his face. I opened the letter. It wasn't from Sarah. It was from Chloe, the friend who had finally broken the silence. "Mark," it read, "Sarah's gone. She couldn't handle the fallout. After the truth came out, her family turned on her, her job let her go because of the public scandal, and she just Broke. She left Leah with her mother and disappeared 3 weeks ago. We think she went to Europe. Joyce is struggling to care for him, and she's talking about putting him up for adoption because she can't afford the life Sarah promised him. I know you've moved on. I know he isn't yours. But I thought you should know that the boy you once called your son is about to become a ghost in the system. I stared at the photo for a long time. The logical part of my brain, the part that had sat through depositions and looked at DNA charts, told me to tear it up. This wasn't my fight. This child was the living embodiment of the worst betrayal of my life. I had no legal right to him, and certainly no moral obligation. Sarah had used him as a pawn, and now she had discarded him when the game was lost. But as I looked at his eyes, innocent, bright, and completely unaware of the wreckage surrounding him, I realized that Sarah's final act of cruelty wasn't the affair. It wasn't even the lie. It was the fact that she had created a life just to use it as a weapon, and when the weapon failed, she threw it away. I picked up my phone and called Elena. "Mark, is everything okay?" she asked, sounding surprised to hear from me. "I need you to look into something," I said, my voice steady. "I want to know the legal requirements for a third-party adoption or legal guardianship, and I need you to contact Sarah's mother." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mark, you know what you're doing, right? This child is the reason your life fell apart. You just got your freedom back. Why would you walk back into that fire?" "Because," I replied, looking at the photo one last time. "For 9 months, I promised that boy I would protect him. I whispered it to him before I knew his name. I whispered it to him in the hospital. Sarah lied about who his father was, but I didn't lie about who I was. I'm not his father by blood. I'm not his father by law. But I'm the only person in the world who actually gave a damn about him without an agenda." A week later, I stood on the porch of my old life. Joyce opened the door looking haggard and defeated. She didn't say a word, she just stepped aside. I walked into the living room, and there, in a playpen in the corner, was the boy. He looked up at me, and for a second, I waited for the sting of anger to hit. I waited for the shadow of the man from Cabo to ruin the moment, but it didn't happen. All I saw was a child who needed a hero. He reached out his hands, the same way he had at the car that day, and I realized that being a man isn't about the blood in your veins, it's about the promises you keep when everything else is gone. Sarah had lost. She had tried to destroy me, but in the end, she had only proven that she was incapable of the one thing I possessed, a soul that couldn't be corrupted by her lies. I picked him up, and he tucked his head into the crook of my neck, a familiar weight I had missed more than I dared to admit. "Let's go, Leo," I whispered. "We're going to start a story that isn't a lie." I walked out of that house and didn't look back. I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't the husband, and I wasn't the fool. I was something else entirely. I was a man who had walked through the fire and come out the other side, carrying the only thing worth saving from the ashes. The world would call it a scandal, but I called it justice. Because in the end, the truth didn't just set me free, it gave me a reason to stay.
Thank you for staying till the end. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the pinned comment. It really means a lot to me.